Imagine you are stranded on a tiny island in the sky with nothing but a few dirt blocks and a small bonus chest to get you started. Can you survive and build a homestead out of this seamless void, or will you perish? Will your homestead continue to thrive, grow and industrialize, eventually turning into City of Columbia that imprisons Elizabeth, the girl that can manipulate space and time? Wait, sorry, wrong game. Skyblock is one of the most popular survival challenges in Minecraft. There are hundreds of variants and a proven track record that it can be in fact done. But what about Vintage Story? Can the game's mechanics support this insane concept? Spoiler alert, in vanilla without mods, not really. But with a carefully curated collection of mods and clever uses of in-game mechanics, it is a different story. There are two versions of this challenge floating around the mod page. I tried both, but found neither to suit my taste. So I got cooking. I reverse engineered Skyblock from the ground up in a custom world, handpicked my own collection of mods, and adjusted them by hand to make Skyblock both a fun and a viable experience. A word of caution, this is a heavily modded version of Vintage Story, and a lot of these mechanics do not exist in the unmodded game. This was a highly experimental run, and I was adjusting the experience on the fly. So if you're a Skyblock enjoyer, you are in luck, because I am going all in on Skyblock. In a classic Skyblock fashion, I was standing on a tiny island in the sky with nothing but a void underneath me. Eventually, this would be transformed into a safe haven of lush platforms with safety railings, but for now, I had to be mindful of falling off. Naturally, my first move was to expand the island with the soil from the starting chest. The starter island was not going to be around for long, and the only reason for expanding was to not lose the precious seeds from the birch tree. I carefully removed every leaf block by hand. The end result was 2 birch seeds, which was an utter necessity to continue. I picked up a few flint rocks scattered around the island to nab an axe. This axe was used to chop down the naked birch. I wanted to clear the center of the island to build an obsidian generator. So I moved the chest to the perimeter of the island, harvested the berries from the 2 bushes, and uprooted them. Once everything was stashed away, I started constructing the obsidian generator. The generator was going to be a vital component providing most of the building blocks for the next 100 days. The first step was to build a platform with the block in the middle and 4 openings to the side in the shape of a cross. Inside of these openings, I placed water sources with a bucket provided in the starting chest. Lava placement came next on top of the center block. This center block must never be broken or the machine breaks, and unfortunately you can't fix this mistake outside of creative mode. There is no way to remove lava once it is placed. Next step was to remove every soil block from the bottom layer, which now had obsidian solidified in places where it touched water. The machine was operational. All I had to do was remove the middle soil block by hand and to quickly replace it with another soil block. This dropped 4 obsidian blocks per cycle, with new ones being generated instantly. This is possible due to the stone relieving mechanic in Vintage Story. An important point if you want to recreate this. The block you are breaking is not the block that lava is resting on top. To make obsidian tools, I grabbed the copper pickaxe provided in the starter chest and broke the obsidian stones with the pick. This provided me with obsidian rock that could be napped into desired tools. I started by napping a knife, which I used to gather what little grass was left on the island. I spent the rest of the day working on the obsidian generator to create 7 stacks of obsidian blocks. As the darkness started to set in, I crafted a fire starter with the grass and sticks, made a campfire, and used that to light up a few torches. Next step was one I don't suggest you try at home. I placed a water source on the edge of the island and dove into the stream. The idea was to place a few obsidian blocks under the island. This would allow me to build a platform underneath. This meant I could safely remove every bit of soil without losing it to the void. Once I had an obsidian ledge, I jumped off the island and started filling the underside of the island with blocks. Next task was to build out the rest of the platform. I had no real plans or a design in mind, but an octagonal shape formed organically. Hardly a super efficient shape, but one that felt right in the moment. Once the outline of the shape was done, I filled it with obsidian stone. Eventually, the platform was finished and I hopped back on the obsidian generator to create a bit more stone. This stone was going into another identical platform about 10 blocks apart from the main one. I settled on building just a quarter of the platform at first. I was in a hurry to start growing things. I needed the first harvest to come in before the food supply provided in the starter chest ran out. I placed a row of medium fertility soil down, then constructed an irrigation canal on the other side. I napped an obsidian hoe and tilled the land. Once that was done, I planted the turnips from the starter chest. I proceeded to build another quarter of the platform and filled it with soil. On this quarter, I planted cattails provided in the starter chest as well. I decided to convert the berries I collected earlier into bush seedlings with the help of a knife, courtesy of the Wild Farming Revival mod. I planted them into the soil along with the 2 mature bushes. Finally, I planted the 2 birch seedlings as well. This was all the farming I could do for the time being. Naturally, I returned to the only thing I could do in the meantime, generating more obsidian. Once I got a bit more obsidian, I removed every trace of the starting island and stashed the soil away. Next, I climbed the obsidian generator and replaced the soil blocks with obsidian as well. I wanted to get every little bit of soil back for other uses. My obsidian generator was now fully obsidian. I built an edge around the island to prevent accidental falls, which was always a real possibility. The next logical step in the progression was to make a basalt generator. This was not going to be a fancy design. Before I could finish, I ran into my first instance of a drifter. This was foreshadowing drifters becoming a bane of my existence. I tried escaping to the secondary platform, only to be greeted by a large gang of drifters hiding in the darkness. I ran back and defended myself with an axe, the only weapon I had at this time. I immediately proceeded to nap an obsidian spear. The spear came in handy as more drifters kept pouring in from other platforms. I was rapidly getting overwhelmed, and with the last sliver of health, I entombed myself in a dirt structure to wait out the night. In the morning, however, I still had problems. The main platform was swarming with drifters and they weren't going away. Luckily, their pathfinding wasn't the greatest, and it was possible to trick them into stepping off the platform and die. Eventually, with only one drifter remaining, I snuck onto the main platform to grab the salted meat from the chest. I proceeded to scarf down a few pieces of my extremely limited food supply. Sheepishly, I approached the last drifter, only to find out the dude was already dead. I harvested his body with a knife and got my first iron nugget. Yes, the drifters were dropping iron nuggets. I was using useful drifter loot mod that I modified by hand to achieve this result. However, the surface drifters hardly dropped any nuggets. The more dangerous varieties accessible via a temporal storm would be key to getting more. Regardless, I was not in the position to fight anything in this moment and was nowhere near the Iron Age, even if I had all the nuggets in the world. I finally returned to the basalt generator. This was a simple 2x2 box, with the left upper block being lava and the 2 bottom blocks being water. Meanwhile, I had an idea to test. I made a small island to the east of the main platform. I wanted to see if I could leverage lava against the drifters. I set the temporal storm frequency to maximum, and the first storm was just around the corner. An easy drifter farm would make a huge difference in the progression. Next, I used the copper hammer provided in the starter chest to break down the basalt stones from the generator into pebbles. This enabled me to craft a stack of basalt sand, courtesy of Not Enough Sand mod. I then created a panning rectangle where I was going to pan the sand. Panning would be a way of life going forward. It was 100% necessary to generate forward progress towards a brighter future. I was using a modified Patches Pan Patch mod, version 1.0 to be exact. I played around with the drop values until I found something that felt slow but balanced. Mainly, the sand panning resulted in a steady supply of copper, since copper tools were integral in the production of pannable material in the first place. Plus, panning produced a decent amount of flax fibers, rusty gears, and fire clay, all vital to the Skyblock's progression. And you better believe it, I was using an auto pan mod. Even further, to get through the soul-crushing grind, a good TV series was a must. The boys fit the bill perfectly.
Listen, Annika, I'm the Homelander, and I can do whatever the fuck I want. Okay?
I panned through the entire stack of sand, and when I was done, the first temporal storm had finally arrived. Good timing, I suppose. I had to wait for a very long time for drifters to start spawning, but when they finally arrived, it was clear my concept was dead in the water. Once the drifters died inside of the lava pit, their bodies simply disintegrated. There was nothing to loot, and that wasn't even the biggest problem. I set the storm's length to the longest possible. This made the storm last way too long, to the point where all my temporal stability was gone and there was no end in sight. I ran to the farming platform and quickly gathered enough grass to make a hay bed. This trick definitely saved me, because otherwise I would have died from the periodic damage. I adjusted the length back to the standard setting after this incident, but left the frequency intact. It was clear the game was not balanced around the highest length setting. After the storm passed, I was greeted with a fully grown birch tree. So I methodically broke every leaf block, but I did not get a single seed back. I cut down the tree and harvested the freshly grown grass. In the name of continuous expansion, I hopped on the obsidian generator for a while. In the morning, the second birch tree was fully grown, and once again I removed every leaf block. I was a lot more fortunate this time around, scoring 4 birch seeds. Next, I decided to finish the other half of the farming platform, after which I filled the platform with soil. Of course, a single block walkway connecting the platforms was not going to do. It was an accident waiting to happen. So I expanded the walkway to 5 blocks, with a layer of obsidian serving as a guardrail. Things felt a bit safer now. In the name of continuous expansion, I started working on the northern platform. This meant a lengthy session on the obsidian generator. The platform would be identical to others. However, I made the edge and the cross-section 2 blocks tall. I had a loose idea of using the platform as a battle arena. With the platform complete, I switched gears a little bit. I had enough clay to make a cooking pot and a bowl in preparation for the first turnip harvest. I also needed to start thinking about smelting, so I formed an ingot mold and a crucible. I stuffed the pit with grass, sticks, and firewood and lit up my first clay firing pit. I didn't bother firing the ingot mold yet. I wanted to clay form a second one, but ran out of clay. More clay meant more panning, and more panning meant more basalt generation. I used the copper pick until it was almost broken and then stashed it away just in case. I would not be able to make more sand from now on until I could smelt another pickaxe. However, I couldn't do much panning because the drifters decided they owned the night and they eventually ran me out of town. Sleeping through the night was my only option. In the morning, I broke the basalt stone with a hammer, which was now also dangerously close to breaking. Then, I crafted more sand from the pebbles and resumed panning. There was not much else to do. I could not start smelting until I crafted tongs, and that was contingent on the cattails maturing. On the 9th of May, the cattails had finally matured. I harvested the tops and flipped them into a single piece of rope. This allowed me to craft tongs, which were integral to my future progression. This was a big deal. Smelting was on the horizon. Of course, I needed to clay form an anvil mold first. I just barely had enough clay for this task. I slapped the anvil mold into the pit, placed all the typical goodies inside, and lit the sucker up. I was still missing a vital component, charcoal. My supply of wood was pretty pitiful though, so I started with the smallest charcoal pit in history.
Ooh, that's kind of small. Yikes.
I clay formed a second ingot mold and was about to fire both just to realize I used up all the firewood for the charcoal. Disappointed, I went to sleep. When I woke up, I had a pretty birch tree standing next to me. I removed the leaves and chopped it for wood. Immediately, I used the wood to start cooking the ingot molds. Afterwards, I came back to process the rest of the trees in a similar fashion and planted new birch seedlings in the soil. Once the clay pieces were done cooking, I slapped the molds on the ground and filled the crucible with copper. I was using firewood to pre-warm the crucible in hopes of saving on charcoal. Speaking of charcoal, the charcoal pit was done cooking and I extracted the minuscule amount of charcoal contained inside. I started feeding the fire with charcoal briquettes one at a time. While the whopping 1200 units of copper were cooking, I crafted my first welcome mat, courtesy of the still useful mod. This would allow me to periodically summon various traders as long as I met specific requirements. My religious dedication to panning was paying off. I had enough linen to make 2 mats, which took 3 linen sheets each. I picked a spot and placed a straw bed, followed by the mat besides it. Meanwhile, the crucible was ready and I poured molten copper into the molds. Casting the anvil was particularly satisfying. Meanwhile, the first harvest of turnips was upon me, just in time, as the last of the salted meat provided in the starter chest was now eaten. I immediately cooked my first pot of turnip stew. On top of requiring a bed, the welcome mat also required a container with food besides it. Since containers were in short supply, I used one of the starting chests. The last requirement, all of these goodies had to be inside of a room. I used the obsidian blocks to cobble together the smallest room possible, slapped in a rough door, and one ultra-cramped summoning apartment was done.
What's up, y'all? Big Snoop Deal Double G. I want to welcome y'all to my house, the dog house. Slide in.
I added a single turnip in the chest and left the summoning ritual to do its thing. I was 3 days away from my first interdimensional visitor. I stopped to smell the roses and to appreciate all of the progress achieved so far in my Skyblock. I didn't rest for too long though. Now that I had the ability to cast copper, I needed to keep producing copper ingots at all times. So I casted 2 more. It was time to get into smithing. I tried crafting a forge, but found out that I had no basalt stones to make cobblestone. Luckily for me, I left the copper pickaxe intact with a sliver of durability and was able to mine enough stone for the task. I combined the basalt stone with clay to make cobblestone and crafted a forge. I then slapped 4 ingots on the forge, added charcoal, and lit the sucker up. I would be constantly smithing additional hammers and pickaxes needed to keep the engine of pain and progression going. And of course, I needed a copper saw. Saws needed to produce planks, which were vital to craft chests. Last tool that I smithed was a pair of shears. After all, breaking these by hand was becoming unsustainable. I then clay formed a couple of more ingot molds to help with ingot production. With a fresh pickaxe, I could continue to run the basalt generator, and with a fresh hammer, I could split basalt stones into pebbles. This enabled me to craft more sand, and before long, I was back into panning mode. This was going to be my reality for a while. It's not like there was much else of value to do at the moment anyway. Every 3 days, I would be hit with a temporal storm, but I had no plans to interact with them anytime soon. Sleeping through these storms was the current strategy. Meanwhile, I was rewarded with my first trader visit. The first 2 traders that made it into my kingdom were a furniture trader and a survival goods trader. From the survival goods trader, I bought 3 stacks of lime. This was meant for the leather production way down the line, but it was cheap and I saw no reason to not stock up. I also got a good deal on a tin bronze folks. The furniture trader had a good deal on brass lanterns, so I spent the rest of my gears to buy 4 of those. The rift activity was popping off that night, and I tried sleeping my troubles away, but even during the day, the drifters would not leave me alone. I figured perhaps placing the lanterns around the platform was going to help with my drifter problem. I also had enough linen from panning now to invest into 4 linen bags. This was quite an upgrade to my inventory, going from 10 slots to 30. Of course, this would slow down my trading progression as every linen sheet going into a bag was not going into a welcoming mat, but it felt like a worthwhile trade-off at this time. One thing was clear, I needed a much larger space to house the trading stations. Since the northern platform was idling empty, I relocated the stations down here. I placed the stations on the opposite side of the platform with an idea of placing many more trading stations down the line. Another batch of birches sprouted on the farming platform. The platform looked extra green, which gave it a very cheerful and inviting look, contrasting the obsidian jungle behind it. Eventually, I wanted to make the rest of my kingdom look just as green, but for now, I did not have the resources to make that a reality. The turnip stew had finally run out, and I started cooking another pot. I did not have a lot of turnips left after this pot. Things were looking extra bleak on the food front for now. Next, I clay formed another 2 ingot molds. I threw them in a firing pit with some grass, sticks, and firewood. This brought me up to 6 molds, which felt like a good amount for the time being. Naturally, I proceeded to the basalt generator to continue generating sand for my panning operation. Most of my nights were now filled with swarms of drifters. I suppose I could have addressed their presence with enough torches, but instead I was skipping the nights. It was awfully cramped in the middle, and now that I moved the trading structures out, there was no real reason to keep them around. I was aggressively smelting copper ingots anytime the previous batch would cool off. The demand for copper was not going away anytime soon. Next, I used my brand new copper shears to break the leaf blocks on the birches. Then, I chopped down the trunks. I finally had more birch seeds that I knew what to do with, so I planted them rather densely on the platform to finish the job. The engine of progress was going full steam ahead. I smithed another hammer and another pickaxe and finished with a double set of nails. What was used had to be replaced though, thus I kept smelting and smelting and smelting. I smithed a copper chisel, which allowed me to convert my broken tools into copper bits, courtesy of the Anvil Recovery mod. This felt realistic, considering broken tools don't just disintegrate into cosmic dust like they do in vanilla vintage story.
Yeah, Mr. White! Yes, science!
I used the copper saw to make boards and combined them with the copper nails to craft double chests. This was timely, considering my place was becoming a mess of outdoor storage. I immediately fired up another 4 ingots and made 2 sets of nails and 2 hammers. Between smithing and breaking basalt, I was blowing through hammers like they were made out of butter. The nails were used to make even more double chests for the storage. Following, it was time to retreat to the safety of my bed to bypass yet another temporal storm. One day they would be vital to my progression, but for now, I was avoiding them like a plague. Meanwhile, my initial supply of charcoal was coming to an end. Surprisingly, I didn't have a ton of disposable wood that I could convert into charcoal. Birches were not the most productive trees. Despite that, the pit was still 2.5 times larger than the previous one. I stopped by the farming platform and noticed the cattails were fully grown yet again. Since I didn't need more rope, I used the Wild Farming Revival mod to propagate the cattails even further. Not that I had a steady supply of tools, I was panning every waking moment. Well, at least I tried to. Often, drifters would prevent me from panning further, and all I could do was sleep. Dealing with the drifters constantly taught me a valuable trick. There were ways to leverage lava against them. Perhaps there's a lava-based farm design that can work after all. However, I did not try to explore this concept any further. Steadily killing drifters was also building me a supply of iron nuggets, but I could not do much with them at the moment. After doing a bit more panning, the second round of trading was upon me. First trader was an artisan, which consistently I found to be the least useful kind of trader. However, the commodities trader was always a welcomed sight. I bought out the entire supply of resin and tin nuggets. Resin and tin nuggets were both highly important for future progress, despite me being nowhere near that point. The second charcoal pit was now finished, and I could resume smithing freely. I attempted another panning session, but was quickly stopped by the drifter menace. Luckily, this happened to coincide with a temporal storm, so I happily hit my straw bed and skipped the doozy of a night. In bad news, I officially ran out of turnips. That meant imminent starvation and inability to summon more traders. The new batch of turnips could not come soon enough. The berry bush seedlings I planted earlier were now fully grown and started to fruit. However, I did not want to eat them for sustenance unless it was an emergency. I was hoping to flip every single berry into more bush seedlings down the line. I want to pretend like I did something exciting, but no, instead I was back to panning once again. I panned until the turnips were ready to be harvested. However, I could not complete this task in peace. The drifters were really scaling up their presence. In fact, it was starting to feel like the rift activity was permanently stuck on medium or above. I grit my teeth and planted the new batch of turnips despite the assault. I had no time to waste. My ability to eat and to summon traders was hinging entirely on turnips. Besides terrorizing me at night, hordes of drifters were chilling on my platforms even during the day. At least, my food issues were resolved for the time being, and I could cook more turnip stew to keep me going. I'm sure you're wondering what's next, but it was the usual. A bit of panning, a bit of basalt generation, and a bit of obsidian generation as well. The time was flying by, in a circular and repetitive motion.
Well, I don't know what I expected.
Eventually, I did reach a milestone worth talking about. I had enough flax from panning to craft 4 more welcoming mats. Of course, I also needed 4 hay beds. Luckily, the farming platform had enough grass to satisfy this requirement. Thus, I set out to build 4 more summoning stations. Here, I ran into a really annoying issue. The welcoming mats had a minimum distance they had to be placed away from each other, and the octagonal platform was not a great design to deal with this requirement. I decided to abandon the location and instead decided to build out a square platform to host the summoning stations. It was a lot more room efficient this way. Before I could execute this idea, I had to sleep through another storm. This time around, the drifters from the storm were not fully gone by the time I woke up, and I had a very close call. A couple of tier 3 drifters almost stripped me a new one. I used the lava trick to set them on fire, then I kited them around as they burned to death. After disposing of the unwanted guests, I started working on the new summoning platform. It was going to be to the south of the main one. Through trial and error, I found out the exact dimensional requirements for the mats. I settled on a long rectangular platform and separated each mat by the minimum distance. This was the most compact design that I could come up with given the limitations. Once I finished the platform, I had to hop on the obsidian generator one more time. After all, I still had to build out the shelters. I proceeded to build the most basic obsidian houses to house my guests. At least, they were a bit larger than the Gen 1 variety. Did I mention that the drifters were an absolute nuisance every single night? Once again, I thought about lighting every inch of my Sky Kingdom with torches, but then the laziness prevailed. Another upgrade to the housing were the fancier doors, now that I had a saw. I left a single turnip in every small chest, and the summoning stations were ready to receive the next batch of traders. This would increase my chances to encounter the most important traders threefold, and I was going to expand this capability even further down the line. Next, I sheared all of the newly grown birches, cut them down for even more wood, and replanted the seeds. I also propagated the cattails one more time and now had a buttload of cattails. Honestly, I had no idea what I was going to do with them anyway. Following, I smithed even more hammers and pickaxes to support the continuous panning. Of course, drifters were still happy to mess with me and in the end were forcing me indoors quite often. I had enough of these interruptions. It was time to build a defensive structure to pan. I built an obsidian box, placed a crude door in the middle, slapped a lantern on the wall and called it a day. This improved my quality of life by a mile. The drifters were not happy with the turn of events and now were trying to break the door nightly, all with their annoying grunts and clipping animations. The vault was not a good location to fight though. For some reason, the hitboxes were extremely wonky inside. Probably something to do with partial blocks everywhere. I panned away until the next summoning. This round of traders was a big one. I managed to score a domestic animal trader, courtesy of the domestic animal trader mod. He sold piglets, which were super important for my future progression. I ended up buying 6 for the whopping sum of 80 gears, significantly cutting into my monetary supply. This amount of piglets was necessary, as there was only 1 1/4 chance that any given piglet would grow up to be a male, and I needed at least 1 to get the breeding going. I visited the other traders, but did not find anything worth buying at this time. Instead, I went back to the northern platform and started retrofitting the platform for the pigs. I removed the double obsidian railing and placed birch fencing around the perimeter to go along with the gate. All that was left to do was to release the piglets and to leave them to mature. I panned some more, I casted another batch of ingots, and by the time I was finished, the piglets were fully grown. I had 2 males in a batch, I was good to breed. Unfortunately, I was in no position to feed them until the next turnip harvest. So, like being stuck in a Groundhog Day, I did another round of familiar activities. Eventually, the turnip harvest came about, at which point I harvested the turnips and replanted them immediately. And I had twice as many seeds now than when I started. I returned to the obsidian generator to make more obsidian to expand my trading capabilities. I added 2 more stations to the end of the platform. I had 8 summoning stations now, really upping my chances to encounter all possible trades. Unfortunately, I was hitting the boundaries of the map to be able to expand any further on this platform. So instead, I cleared out the failed lava trap experiment and built out 2 more trading units for a total of 10. All that was left to do was to place the hay beds inside, load every station with turnips, and to wait for the next summoning. Meanwhile, I went back to the farming platform to harvest another batch of grass. Most of the dry grass in my possession was used up on hay beds. In good news, I now had a scythe to expedite this process. I jumped right back into panning afterwards and panned until the next summoning. I had a lot of trades to choose from, but was still careful about investing my gears. I was making sure to have enough on hand to buy progression necessities if the need ever arose. Hence, I bought a bunch of linen sheets from the closing trader and not much else. The traders were also getting desynced from each other, so I ended up breaking and replacing all the welcoming mats to make sure that the traders were going to show up and disappear uniformly in the next round. Once again, I loaded the chest with turnips and left until the next set of traders would show up with their goodies. Next, I stopped by the farming platform to cut down freshly grown cattails. I had so many and I wasn't sure what to do with them. So I removed most of them and planted a bunch of berry bush seedlings instead, since the few bushes I had finally ripened and I could flip the berries into more seeds. When these would mature, I was going to have an astronomical amount of berry bushes. With nothing more else to do, I resumed panning. I hit up the basalt generator, and once I converted everything into sand, I got into my panning bunker. The drifters were trying to break down the door systematically, and at some point they did. Wait, what? I didn't know that drifters could do this. I tried escaping the vault, but was getting caught on the door frame. Like I mentioned in my intro, I wanted to treat this as a hardcore run, so I'm willing to give out a little hardcore secret. If you exit and enter the world, sometimes the enemies lose focus, giving you a grace period. Surprisingly, this trick actually worked. Eventually, I ran to the bed and slept through the night. The panning vault was still full of moaning drifters in the morning. There was no way I was going down there yet. Instead, I switched to smithing copper plates to make hoppers. I would need them shortly. By the time I finished, another round of trading was upon me. I purchased beeswax, saltpeter, and resin from the commodities trader, but I didn't see anything else useful despite having access to 10 traders total. I was back to the familiar routine of smelting, smithing, and running the obsidian generator. This would naturally lead to more panning. Perhaps this video should be renamed to 100 Days in Vintage Story, the Pan Block Challenge.
Write that down, write that down!
I did replace the door in the panning vault. I went from a rough door to a nice solid birch door. Don't think the rough door was the reason behind the great door failure, but the birch door did make me feel safer. Soon, a familiar sight of a drifter horde trying to bust the door materialized. The door was holding, at least so far. I smelted more ingots and panned some more, all the way until the turnips were ready for harvest. Most of the harvest, however, was going towards the pigs. I was putting myself into a possible starvation situation, but was willing to take the risk in order to start breeding pigs. So I built a lot of large troughs and loaded them with turnips. Eventually, after doing more panning, while continuously restocking the troughs, the sows were pregnant. I broke the troughs to extract whatever turnips were left. Every turnip was precious, that was for sure. The next round of trades came in, and with them 2 agricultural traders graced me with their presence. One sold me oak seeds, parsnip seeds, and compost, while the other had pine seeds as well as more parsnip seeds. Both of them carried fully grown parsnips as well. I bought them out and converted them into more seeds courtesy of the wild farming survival once again. I ran to my farming platform and removed all the useless cattails to make room for more parsnips. I dug more rows on the platform, added irrigation to each row, tilled the soil, and finally planted more parsnips. However, this hardly put a dent into the seeds. So I removed the birches and repeated the process of converting the quarter into a full-fledged parsnip farm. Now that my sows were pregnant, I didn't need the males anymore. It was time to go full carnivore. Like pigs to slaughter, I killed the males and shortly had a pot of meat stew cooking on the fire. More saturating food meant more freedom to do stuff without stopping to eat. The Sky Kingdom had to continue expanding, so I hopped on the obsidian generator one more time. I extended the partial platform that housed 2 trading units into another octagonal platform. Like with the previous platforms, I laid out the skeleton foundation first and then filled it with obsidian. I decided to utilize this platform to grow trees. To save on soil, I only filled every other block, the rest was filled with obsidian. Here, I planted the recently acquired oaks and pines. Meanwhile, I started working on my first windmill. I finally had a source of fat from the pigs that enabled me to do just that. I needed to get a pulverizer up and running, so I crafted a windmill rotor and then produced a couple of gears. Between panning and purchasing linen from the traders, I had just enough materials to make 4 sets of sails. The problem was, I needed a ton of extra room for the windmill and all other machinery. That meant it was time to run the obsidian generator for a while. I decided to utilize the upper left quadrant and build a brand new platform to house all of the automation. Same shape, same building pattern, and before long, another octagonal platform was online. Once the central shaft was built out, I placed the rotor on top and slapped the sails on the rotor. The windmill came alive. Unfortunately, the few male pigs I killed did not provide me with sufficient fat to craft enough axles, and I had to put the project on hold. I switched to crafting a few barrels, filled them with water, and made diluted limestone. I was preparing to start leatherworking in the near future. One thing missing from my arsenal of tools and devices was a quern. This meant creating yet another basalt generator. This one was capable of generating whole basalt blocks. Once again, I leveraged the relieving mechanic to achieve this feat. I generated the required blocks and crafted a quern. At this point, the bottleneck to further progress were the pigs. Between the fat, the bones, and the hides, they held the key to my future. So I hopped back into panning to pass the time. I stopped once a new set of traders showed up at my door. I bought glass blocks from the building materials trader, but more importantly, the commodities trader provided a decent amount of bismuth and zinc to make bismuth bronze, as well as sulfur. The agricultural trader had 2 redwood seeds, which I couldn't pass up on buying. I planted these redwood seeds on the dedicated tree farming platform. Afterwards, I resumed panning when I suddenly realized I forgot to provide food for the next summoning. One problem, the turnips were all gone. Luckily, the previous batch of traders was still around. So I stopped by to check their trades and found that the agricultural trader was selling blueberries. I deposited some berries in the chests and used the rest to create more seeds to plant. Meanwhile, the piglets were out of the bellies of their mothers and I could safely kill the first generation of sows. Of course, they were ultra aggressive with the piglets running around. As a result, I got a pretty good ass beating. I grabbed the meat, the fat, the hides, and most importantly, the bones. Combined with the hides from the males, I put 9 hides into a barrel with lime water to start my first batch of leather. Afterwards, I wanted to do some more housekeeping, but was quickly retired into the panning vault by the swarms of drifters. I would eventually automate the panning process, but for now, this was my life. In the morning, I casted my first set of tin ingots to make a tin bronze plate and 2 caps for the pulverizer. I finally had all the necessary components for the pulverizer and the required automation to go along with it. I went to the respective platform and tinkered around with the correct setup. Eventually, I plugged the pulverizer into the windmill. I hopped on the basalt generator to make basalt stone. These stones were broken down with a hammer for the sake of time and then placed into a pulverizer to process them further. The output was crushed basalt, which went into the quern to make powdered basalt. Now I could combine powdered basalt, crushed basalt, basalt pebbles, and basalt stones to make barren soil. This was an important milestone in the progression. Next step was to use the quern to grind pig bones into the bone meal. Barren soil combined with sticks, grass, and bone meal would produce bony soil. Bony soil was the next step in my Skyblock domination. Besides producing rusty gears and flax fibers, bony soil also produced a decent amount of gold and silver nuggets. This was the whole point of progressing towards the bony soil. Both silver and gold were required for further progression inside of the Skyblock format. Meanwhile, pines and oaks grew to maturity. Of course, I had to shear them naked in order to score seeds, and once accomplished, I cut them down for wood. Next set of traders came around, and with them, an agricultural trader who sold me berries on the cheap, along with 8 bowls of honey for basically nothing. It felt like a robbery. The remaining gears were invested into buying more bones from the domestic animal trader. I wanted to craft more bony soil, and the bones were the limiting reagent in the process. The oak logs from the recent tree harvesting allowed me to start brewing tannins needed for the leather working. Meanwhile, I was ready to start working on the auto sifter, a device that would pan automatically, which would be a game changer in the Skyblock. First step was to cast brass ingots in order to smith brass plates. I would need at least 2 of those. Next, I casted 2 silver solder ingots. They would be cut with a saw to make 10 solder bars. Smelting was not going great though, and eventually drifters forced me into the panning vault, where I panned. In the morning, I first addressed my dwindling supply of charcoal by making a much bigger charcoal pit. I had plenty of wood to spare now. With the whole day ahead of me, I started a lengthy smithing session. I smithed more copper tools and more copper plates. I then casted more copper ingots and smithed the 2 brass plates, followed by smithing even more copper plates and more smelting. The operation was proceeding full steam ahead. Meanwhile, the charcoal pile was done cooking and I dug it out. I then stuffed the leatherwork in barrels, advancing the various stages. Next, I resumed the metalworking session, which meant more copper plates, more copper ingots, more copper plates, more copper ingots, more copper plates, and more copper ingots.
Say
More copper plates,
again, I dare you, I double dare you, motherfucker. Say
more copper ingots.
one more goddamn time.
Eventually, I was done and moved on to grinding bones, followed by basalt generation. With the stone at hand, I still had plenty of pebbles, crushed and powdered basalt to craft more barren soil, which I then converted into more bony soil. I jumped into panning action and panned through the batch. When I was done, more traders came around and I scored more resin and tin. Yet another trader stocked zinc nuggets. Bronze alloys were vital to progressing, so it was a no-brainer to buy anything bronze related. I immediately casted 2 tin bronze ingots. While they were cooling off, I worked on shearing a new batch of oaks and pines, after which I smithed a tin bronze chain. The drifters were still driving me bananas, often forcing me to retreat inside. I slept if I could, or idled AFK if I couldn't. Next, I chopped down the naked tree trunks and planted a new batch as tightly as I could. Finally, I had all the necessary materials for the auto sifter. The list of materials included 8 copper plates, 2 brass plates, 10 silver solder bars, a soldering iron, and a toggle. To finish it, I had to attach a tin bronze chain to the empty auto sifter. It took an enormous amount of effort to produce the parts, but here it was, my freedom from panning. I created a catch basin for the auto sifter and plugged it into the windmill. The design looked pretty silly visually since you had to stack pannable blocks on top of the sifter, creating an enormous line into the sky. I made an obsidian pillar with a ladder attached to it to make loading the sifter easier. There were a few issues with my new device. The sifter was significantly slower than panning by hand, but at least it freed me up to do other labor. Another problem, only about 30% of the drops would make it to the hopper, rest would be spit out all over the place. Despite me trying various catch basin designs, the end solution was to set the item despawn timer to an hour. Not something I would recommend in a standard world, but in a tiny skyblock there were no real consequences. This meant I didn't need to check for loose items every 10 minutes, which is the standard despawn setting. Meanwhile, another turnip harvest came up. The sows in the pan were finally ready to mate, so I put a crap ton of large drops in the middle of the pan and loaded them up with turnips. I was sustaining myself exclusively on meat stew now, so every single turnip from last 2 harvests could be fed to the pigs. Next set of traders brought with them a decent deal on the copper lanterns, so I purchased 5 in hopes of squashing more of the drifter spawns. Drifters were driving me up the wall. In further hopes of simplifying my life, I bought a hacked locust from a domestic animal trader to test. Spoiler alert, it was awful and a waste of gears. It got stuck and despawned almost right away. Are they this bad in real game? I'm not sure. I never played a Clockwork, but seeing this is not inspiring me to try one. All the sows were finally pregnant. I still needed hides, fat, and bones big time. I couldn't touch the sows for obvious reasons, but once again I could kill all the boys. Quickly, I ran out of health, but had a contingency plan. I ground the sulfur acquired from trade in the quern and sacrificed a few linen sheets to go along with the honey to make the best poultices in the game. I used those to get back into action and finish the job. I got an influx of bones, which meant I could craft more bony soil. I reloaded the autosifter up to the sky with the new batch. Next, I decided to place the copper lanterns around the platforms. I turned on the spawn highlighter mod and tried to get the best coverage. Can't say it helped a whole lot. Drifters continued to parade around my kingdom. It was time to acquire an armor set. If I couldn't eliminate their spawns, at least I could make them stop being a threat. Plus, temporal storms were the next step in the progression, and I would need better equipment to handle them. I began this journey by clay forming more ingot molds. I settled for 6 more molds. Meanwhile, I started casting more tin bronze ingots to make health hammer heads. I didn't want to smith the armor components by hand, and thus started to work on my standard quad health hammer setup. I proceeded to smith 4 heads and another bronze forks. The one I bought from a trader was almost broken. Now that the autosifter was slowly working through the stacks of bony soil, I had enough gold and silver to start casting black bronze ingots. Thus, I casted the first batch of 12. The armor could not come soon enough. I kept having close calls after close calls, defending my territory. The first harvest of parsnips had finally occurred. I harvested an absolute boatload of them and replanted them right away. I was going to feed them to the next generation of pigs, but little did I know. Meanwhile, I kept running the pulverizer at all times, continuously producing more pebbles and crushed basalt. The demand for barren soil was constant, and this was the key to producing more. Another set of traders brought more resin and linen cloth. And I also bought fat from an agricultural trader and more flax wines from the commodities trader as well. Furthermore, I kept buying clear glass whenever I had an opportunity. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet. If I had spare time, I was running the basalt generator to produce more basalt stone for the pulverizer. Meanwhile, I had a massive harvest of berries. I started with 2 bushes initially and now had a full berry operation. I didn't really need the berries for sustenance. Naturally, I decided to juice them to make booze. Everything is more fun with a glass of wine in the end. So I transferred the juice into the barrels and sealed them shut. While doing that, I heard the familiar squeal of the piglets, which meant it was time for the mothers to contribute towards forward progress. The sows did not go down without a fight, and the healing poultices were working overtime. Meanwhile, I decided it was time to start clearing out the main platform for my future residence. The panning vault went first. I was not going to pan by hand ever again. I had enough of it for a lifetime. Meanwhile, I ground the bones in the quern to craft more bony soil when I realized I was running into another rate limiting step, and the step was producing enough grass. It was time to make an expansion platform dedicated to farming grass. Before that though, I used my remaining lime to start another batch of leather, now that I had plenty of hides from killing the pigs. I had plenty of oaks to start brewing 4 barrels of tanning ahead of time as well. Meanwhile, I found out that pigs don't eat parsnips. Somehow, I don't feel that is the case in real life. It put a huge damper on the excitement for all the parsnips I had stashed away. Next, I built out the platform intended for farming grass. I filled it with every piece of soil, collecting dust in my chests. It wasn't as much as I wanted, but it was all the soil I had for the time being. I continued working on the windmill and half hammer components. I had enough materials to craft the additional rotors, which I started stacking up behind the original windmill. While I had the materials for the rotors, my linen cloth supply was not up to par. This meant I could not craft the required sails just yet and had to pump the brakes until the auto sifter or trading caught up to the demand. Meanwhile, I managed to cast another batch of black bronze ingots. I was suddenly generating tons of grass by leaning into one simple trick. The fastest way to generate grass was to repeatedly replace blocks that were harvested or didn't generate any grass to begin with. Waiting on the grass to regenerate was not the play. With this discovery, I got back on track with crafting bony soil. This meant more linen cloth to make sails and more alloys to make black bronze. The armor could not come fast enough. The drifters kept being a massive nuisance every single night. I forgot what it felt like to not have them around. Meanwhile, I started placing the half hammers around the platform and figuring out the connection requirements. Another batch of turnips was ready for harvest. So I grabbed the turnips and expanded my farm to 3 quadrants to accommodate additional seeds. The second batch of leather was done cooking, and I crafted the required leather pieces that will go into the black bronze chainmail. This left me with enough leather to craft 3 leather bags. Meanwhile, I was starting to run low on copper. While auto-panning the bony soil was great, it did not produce copper nuggets. So I went back to the basalt generator and ran it for a while. Then I loaded up the pulverizer and let it do its thing to turn basalt stone into pebbles. Once I crafted a bunch of sand, I went back to the auto sifter to load it up. I threw it all from the top of the highest block, thinking I was really slick. Except sand gravity clearly didn't work the way I thought it did, so I made a big mess instead. While the auto sifter was busy doing its thing, I grabbed a stack of dirt and started climbing. Climbing very high to trim the redwood trees, in hopes of getting extra redwood seeds. It took absolutely forever to trim the 2 redwoods, and I only got a single seed out of it. I then chopped down the pines, followed by the oaks, and finally the redwoods went down as well. Another batch of traders came around, but the only thing I was interested in buying were the linen sheets. This allowed me to finally finish the 4th windmill for my smithing setup. Now, all that was left to do was to correctly route every half hammer to its respective windmill, and the setup came alive. Before immersing myself in smithing, I ran the basalt generator to get more basalt stone, which I converted into basalt cobblestone to craft more forges. I then casted another 12 black bronze ingots and finished casting with another 6. Finally, I had enough ingots for a full set of armor. I placed the additional forges down, loaded them up with black bronze, heated them up with some charcoal, and started smithing. A batch of booze got done brewing just in time, so I figured this was as good time as any to get plastered. With a nice buzz and wearing just a leotard, I proceeded to smith through the night. At dawn, I had enough components to make a full set. I was a proud owner of a black bronze suit of chainmail. This was very timely, as another temporal storm was about to hit my kingdom. I was sleeping through them until now, but it was time to face the music. I crafted a bunch of additional poultices and entered the nightmare. It was surprisingly quiet for a while, despite it being a heavy storm. When the drifters started coming, I started killing them mostly by kiting. While a black bronze chainmail set was great, it still only provided tier 2 protection. This meant I was not particularly tanky and still took a lot of damage. On top of that, I had another issue. The pathfinding of the drifters often led them off the edge, thus losing me their precious bodies to loot. During the storm, I did not see a single double-headed drifter either. With the slow start and lack of double-headed drifters, the loot kinda sucked. I only managed to score 56 iron nuggets. When combined with what I already had from fighting the surface drifters, I had enough for a full bloomery worth of iron. To celebrate this fact, I spent the morning enjoying a pretty sunrise before springing back into action. Next, I had to craft fire clay bricks. Luckily, I had plenty of clay from all the panning and not much else to spend it on. So I loaded up the fire pits and let them burn. Following, I stopped by a tree farm and planted more seeds as densely as I could. Then, I started feeding the pigs my limited supply of turnips. But what else would I do with them anyway? I spent a good chunk of time in the obsidian generator to get more obsidian. I wanted to finish the last of the walkways between the platforms. Most needed to be widened and additional safeguards installed. After, I collected the now cooked fire clay bricks and finished the platform with additional soil. The drifters continued being a nuisance, but at least they only tickled now. In the morning, the first bloomery was done cooking, so I hastily grabbed the iron blooms and ran to the smithing platform in excitement. I tried plopping the hot blooms on the anvil, but nothing happened. Of course, I forgot a vital component for this step. My anvil was still just a copper one. The iron had to wait.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Unfortunately, I was dependent on trading to get the required bronze alloy nuggets. Thus, I had to hurry up and wait for the next round of trades. I now started to work the basalt generator not only to satisfy my obsession with bony soil, but to produce additional soil to place on every single platform. Luckily, the next batch of traders had a commodities trader who brought tin nuggets with him. I also managed to score more linen sheets, bismuth nuggets, and more redwood seeds. Redwood seeds were rare enough that it felt okay spending 18 gears on them. After trading, I had enough metal to cast a tin bronze anvil. Another batch of turnips went straight to the pigs, as most of them had not eaten 10 portions yet. This got them over the hump, and most were now pregnant. Meanwhile, I replaced the copper anvil with a bronze one and started working on the iron blooms. The very first thing I smithed was a blackguard sword, which was a huge upgrade for me. I barely managed to craft it as another storm descended on the kingdom. I stubbornly fought the drifters while working the rest of the blooms. I wasn't going to waste any charcoal. I finally encountered my first double-headed drifter, which packed a massive punch with his tier 4 attack. The knockback almost sent me flying off the platform. I still had a problem of the drifters committing ritual from time to time as well. Despite that, this was a productive storm and I collected 85 iron nuggets. However, it wasn't all good news. My black bronze suit took a massive beating from just 2 storms. Soon, I would need more black bronze ingots for repairs. I didn't want to invest any more resources into the black bronze set, however. Instead, I got an idea of restoring a forlorn set. To that effect, I bought a broken forlorn chest in the next round of trading. In the end, I would need at least 200 gold nuggets to restore the entire set, but that was actually not impossible. But to get that much gold, the auto sifter had to continue going brrrr. So I ground more bones, harvested more grass, crafted more bony soil, and piled it up on the auto sifter. Next, I made the largest charcoal pit to date as the bloomeries started taking their toll on my limited supply. In the effort of clearing the main platform, I removed the basalt generator and moved most other infrastructure off the platform as well. I was going to erect a house soon. I was very tired of living under the stars with the local riffraff. Following, I heated up the iron blooms and converted them into ingots. These ingots I flipped into an iron shield, a bit more defense for the next storm. I dug out the big charcoal pit and was set on charcoal until the end. I was also forced to start casting more black bronze ingots for the chainmail repair. Then I reluctantly smithed them into more chains. I didn't want to do it, but it was necessary. Meanwhile, I laid out the foundation for my future dwelling. Truthfully, I had no design in mind, and I wouldn't have that much time to begin with. I was just going to cobble something together for the sake of having it. The next temporal storm hit, and I started the usual grind for iron. This time around, the drifters kept spawning in the animal pen, making fighting around the pigs a lot more cumbersome. This is where I would have met my end if this was a hardcore playthrough. At some point, my chest lost all durability, and I ended up taking a massive hit far greater than anything anticipated. I had to perform emergency maintenance during the storm. The end result was another 85 iron nuggets. Slowly but surely, I was building a supply of iron, but most of it would go towards the forlorn repair. Speaking of forlorn armor, the next set of traders brought me 2 missing pieces. However, I was lagging on the gold acquisition. To facilitate getting more gold, I needed to speed up the auto sifter. I had an excess of bony soil, and the auto sifter was the rate limited step now. I bought more resin from a commodities trader to craft a large gear. The gear installation took a rather big redesign of the windmill area. Eventually, I plugged the gear into the 2 windmills and redirected that power inside of the auto sifter. This made the sifter about 80% faster by my estimation. Of course, I still did not have enough iron either. To ease some of the wear and tear on the armor, I decided to start abusing water to fight the drifters. This tech was copied from all other underground digging I have performed around various bodies of water in my other videos. It wasn't foolproof, but still helped a bit with avoiding unnecessary damage. I still had an issue with the drifters ditching the platform, including precious double-headed drifters. Despite that, I was becoming more efficient with each passing storm. I made some more fire clay bricks, made some more bloomeries, and cooked more blooms. I casted more black bronze ingots to repair my chainmail as well. Finally, I decided to install fencing around the platform to prevent drifter loss. Right about now, I had a big project on my mind. I wanted to fill the platforms with grass blocks everywhere. Less obsidian and more grass. That was the motto. This meant grinding basalt for days. Basalt wasn't even the main issue. I was mostly rate limited by the pulverizer at this point. Meanwhile, I was buying more luxury items from the traders now with each passing round. However, I was back to smithing by hand. 2 of the windmills were permanently occupied by the sifter and the pulverizer. Luckily, I didn't need to do a lot of it, just enough to keep my armor from falling apart. I got pretty good at using the water flow to take minimal damage now during the storms. Also, my newly placed fencing prevented the drifters from running away. They definitely tried, just to get stabbed in the back. Perfecting my execution netted me the largest haul yet, 111 nuggets to be exact. Meanwhile, the new generation of pigs had matured. This time around, I could finally start using the cleaver to safely kill them without recourse. It made an amazing difference. Chasing pigs around is no fun. My bone supply issue had been officially solved. However, what wasn't solved was the corn situation. I tried plugging the corn into a windmill, but found that it was about 3 times slower than grinding by hand. Now, the majority of my time was going towards running the basalt generator, pulverizing the output, and running the quern. The combined output was going towards crafting soil that finally wasn't going towards some form of panning. So I started laying out the soil around my Skyblock kingdom. First, I laid out the central platform. I also put down redwood flooring inside of the house. I really liked the color and had plenty of redwood to work with. Next step was to start putting fencing around all possible edges. I still had plenty of birch wood left, so I could continue with that color. I kept working on the barren soil production while letting the auto sifter do its thing. I was getting closer and closer to the required amount of gold. Meanwhile, I decided to move the berry bushes to the empty platform while expanding the rest of the farming platform to be solely dedicated to the vegetables. Another project was lifting the entire animal pen up 1 block higher to accommodate the soil blocks. The temporal storms were becoming pretty routine. Between having a shield, a fence platform, room to kite, water for defense, not even double-headed drifters were a big problem. I was making a full bloomery worth of iron every single storm. I had finally finished working on the pen and it looked a lot more inviting. Following, I started filling out the rest of the platforms with the soil as well. The next set of traders brought with them a new trader. It was a trader I modified by hand to mostly carry flowers. I also bought a ton of colored glass, wallpapers, and other stuff to spice up the kingdom. In awesome news, I had finally discovered a fully AFK-able way to farm basalt. All I had to do was to hold the left click with the macro and point far enough away that I couldn't accidentally break a block. This expedited the soil production, and soon I was ready to remove most of the windmill infrastructure to fit the soil blocks. The trading outpost was the last platform to get soil. In the middle of the windmill platform, I installed the new and improved health hammer setup. I was done with the pulverizer and the auto sifter forever, so I decommissioned them and stashed them away in the chests. Next, I built 4 evenly spaced windmills and plugged them into my new setup. Finally, I had all the necessary materials and the infrastructure to make the forlorn set a reality. I started by casting a bunch of pure gold ingots, something that is hilariously hard to do in a regular game. Next, I heated up the iron blooms and converted the blooms into iron ingots. Once all the blooms were processed, I heated up the iron ingots and smithed them into chains and plates. I did the same with the gold ingots as well. Once I had all the materials smithed, I repaired the armor from the broken state. And then one more set of repairs to a fully repaired armor. Here it was, my first forlorn set ever. It was beautiful. It's my favorite set in the game. I really dig the bright and playful colors. I proudly deposited the black bronze set on the armor stand inside of my house, which I was fully moved into by now. Yes, it didn't have a roof yet, but so what. At least it was protected by a badass armor dummy wearing a black bronze armor set armed with a copper scythe. I only had 1 more month of game time left. From now on, I was focusing on beautifying the Sky Kingdom. First order of business was to fix the ugly trading station houses. I decided to use the redwood planks and colored glass to create simple housing. I didn't bother to engage with temporal storms anymore. I had plenty of iron to spare until the end of this playthrough. By the end, I had 8 houses remodeled. I was using more roofing mod to have wooden roof options. Next, I wanted to upgrade the windmills into something that didn't look like a bunch of sails on a stick. I decided to utilize the redwood planks once again. The design was super simple, with a square base and a rectangular top. Again, I was looking for something better than basic. I didn't have time to design something epic like in some of my other videos. In the end, it looks something like this. It was finally time to work on the main house. I was going to raise up the walls, build new windows, and continue straight up. I raised the wall until I evened out with the top of the OG obsidian generator. I put a glass cover over the lava and incorporated the generator top into the floor design. Then I continued building up while narrowing the building. Next, I decided that I didn't like the windows on the first floor, and instead I put glass all around in a circular fashion. I had plenty of glass to spare from accumulated trades over time. After narrowing the build, I continued building straight up with a bit more glass in the middle level. I took a break from working on the house and placed the berry bushes on the empty platform. Things were coming together. For the third level of the house, I decided to widen again, then go straight up with a few windows. And in the end, ended up with something bulbous? Look, we all know what it looks like, right?
7, 6, 5, 4, command enter, 2, 1, ignition.
A bit like someone's dick rocket. The soil cover was covered by grass now, but I thought it gave off an unattended look. The grass cover was a bit too random, so I set the scythe to remove the grass permanently and went to town. First, I removed the grass in the pig pen. Then I chiseled a little lantern holder in the middle. In my new berry bush platform, I removed the soil in between the berry bushes and converted the soil into packed dirt. Once again, it looked more polished, like someone's real vineyard. I continued removing the grass around the other platforms as well. On the tree platform, I replaced the obsidian with soil and removed the 2 trading stations. I was going mostly for aesthetics now. I planted a couple of more trees to even out the tree spacing. Now that the grass was removed, I replaced most of the empty spaces with flowers. It gave the kingdom a bit more of an interesting look. I would have preferred flower boxes, but the space was too limited for that with my current design. I then used a random wallpaper to brighten up the bottom walls of the main house. This constituted almost all the things I wanted to achieve in this playthrough. I was ready to Netflix and chill from now on. I met another sunset while admiring my forlorn set. Netflix and chill meant getting drunk anywhere and everywhere. I had plenty of alcohol to spare to be drunk all the way until day 100. There was one more thing I wanted to test. The domestic animal trader carried bells for an astronomical price of 65 gears. I had nothing else to spend the gears on, so I bought one. There was just a standard bell encounter with all the continuously summoned mobs. Perhaps this would make for a good iron farm. I made a mental note for the next Skyblock. I killed the bell easily, and to my surprise, it dropped a resonator cylinder. I didn't know they could drop music records. In the last batch of trading, one of the traders had a resonator. Now that I had a tuning cylinder, it made sense to buy one. I didn't know they could drop music records. I had just enough gears to buy 2 more bells as well, so I did. I fought them and they dropped 2 more cylinders. One was a repeat of the one I already had, but the second cylinder was a new record. I climbed the top of my house, installed the newly bought resonator, and enjoyed my records with a dance-off. I slept one more time and then set atop of my house to meet the day 100 mark. This was an eventful journey, more fun than I expected. While I wasn't that impressed with the artistic direction of my Sky Kingdom, I was very impressed with how far I came. From a tiny little island in the sky to a full vintage story homestead. I looked around one last time and said my goodbyes. I would never see it again. And another 100-day challenge is in the books. Unsurprisingly, I enjoyed this one quite a bit. I always liked the idea of starting from zero and building up, and this challenge satisfied this requirement. Although I did have to learn quite a bit about modding to make this playable. It took me 4 restarts to really nail down the feel of the progression, figure out the mod loadout, and to work out all other issues. Perhaps one day I could release a standalone Skyblock mod with all the modifications built into it. If you're still here, I love you. For real this time, I'm taking a break from Vintage Story. I don't intend to play again until the 1.20 version comes out, so it is highly unlikely I will release another 100 days video until next year. I have an interview video in the works and that might come out this year, but no promises. Regardless, there will be plenty of content next year. I will make another poll soon to find out what y'all want to see next. I hope you enjoyed the Skyblock journey, and on that note, Oscillascape is beaming out and beaming into dad mode. My second kid is weeks away. Crazy!